The Israel-Palestine conflict has been nothing more than an outright disaster, visiting tragedy upon the most innocent. And what do we see? We see that the recent attacks that have led to the death of U.S. service members on the Jordanian-Syrian border have now caused nothing more than calls for escalation between what? The United States and Iran, because this was apparently done by an Iranian-backed militia in Iraq that attacked U.S. troops on the Jordanian-Syrian border. And because of this fact, 3 soldiers have been killed, 34 injured. And with that, what do we see? People like Joe Biden and his ilk, the neoconservative mindset, consistently calling for what? Ramping up tensions and escalations with Iran. People like Nikki Haley, Senator John Cornyn, Lindsey Graham, Dan Crenshaw, and so many others calling for what? The bombing of Iran. As they've been doing so consistently for so long, we can see that they've been salivating for this war for ages, and there's no better example of this than 7 countries in 5 years in the clip of General Wesley Clark. You know what, actually? For those who haven't seen it, we're going to go ahead and play that right now. For many people who have seen this channel and watched numerous of my videos, you may have actually already seen this clip, but it's important that you see it once more so you can understand that the mindset behind those who are pushing for war with countries like Iran was always the plan. It was always the plan to take over 7 countries in 5 years. It just appears that the U.S. empire simply dropped the ball in the timescale.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
We'll be starting off our escapades on Twitter with that of Lindsey Graham, and something that I find so unbelievable about all of this is that, well, people like this, before they go and the Reaper takes them swiftly, may actually get their last dying wish. And for Lindsey Graham, it is most certainly war with Iran. You can practically see him salivating over the blood of innocent Iranians. Hit Iran now. Hit them hard, he says. That's the mindset of these people. Lindsey Graham has been on this tirade for quite some time. In fact, actually talking about bombing Iranian oil refineries months ago, before U.S. soldiers ever died in this conflict. And he was saying to do this in an attempt to weaken Iran. Doesn't matter how many innocent people work at those oil refineries and those oil processing plants. No, that's irrelevant. All that matters is that we can glass this country full of 90 million people, and if you're unfamiliar with what I'm referencing in that statement, Nikki Haley openly calling in the past to attack Hamas and Iran and finish them. This is the rhetoric out of these people. Absolutely disgusting, and they do not hide who they are. They just show you full send because they believe that it's just the things that they advocate for, like bombing oil refineries and killing innocent people who bear no culpability for the actions taken that lead to things like the death of innocent people in war. What we have to do, says Lindsey Graham, is bomb innocent people to make the precedent set that people shouldn't be attacking innocent people in war. Yeah, I know. And now we go on to Senator John Cornyn. Target Tehran. Oh my God, go fuck yourself. Here on to Dan Crenshaw. Well, what do we see? This is just John McCain with one eye. I'm deeply saddened to learn 3 of our finest were killed and dozens more injured today by a drone strike. The attack originated from radical militia groups, but make no mistake, Iran is responsible. Iran backs these groups and often directs them. No more weak, proportionate responses. Weakness invites aggression and escalation. Time to kill another Iranian general, perhaps? That might send the right message. Well, it didn't send the right message last time because all it did was activate the Iranian militias in the region against the United States even further and then lead us to the point where we're at now where they have more animosity for us. But people like this can't even see that, and if they do, it doesn't matter. They'll gladly use the excuse of, oh my gosh, look at these dead soldiers, I care so much about them. So quick, what we have to do is make sure that we're fighting war with a country that's far larger than anything else that we fought in the Middle East, and what we need to do is make sure that we're putting boots on the ground so we can have many of our U.S. soldiers slaughtered 8,000 miles away from their homeland, all at the behest of what? People like Dan Crenshaw finally getting what they want, which is war with Iran. Here we go on to Senator Tom Cotton. He says, sadly, as I've predicted, this would have happened, and I said so months ago. The only answer to these attacks must be devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist forces, both in Iran and across the Middle East. Anything less will confirm Joe Biden as a cowardly, unworthy president of a man who is not fit to be commander-in-chief. So here's something that I find absolutely so insane about that, is that people like Senator Tom Cotton completely avoid the fact that we gave the Iranians $6 billion, which they ended up using to fund the attacks that were possibly giving Hamas weaponry to then propel their onslaught onto Israel. So, they don't want to address the fact of our culpability in that. No, we just need to address the fact that Iran is responsible. And here we go into Tucker Carlson. Fucking lunatics in response to Lindsey Graham and Senator John Cornyn. Senator John Cornyn, a senator from my state of Texas. What are you doing? You are no Texan if you are advocating for things like this. Nothing more than a filthy, disgusting Zionist war pig. And here we go on to Vivek Ramaswamy's response to what Tucker Carlson had to say. For centuries, American statesmen reviled the thought of civilian deaths and war as a last resort. Now we have the likes of Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley giddily calling to hit Iran now and hit them hard. It's disgusting and says a lot about the kind of GOP they're trying to recreate. And yes, that's most certainly true. And if you want a clip of Nikki Haley that goes ahead and shows how she operates and plays her hand, well, here you can see this clip from Michael Tracy. Nikki Haley calls for bombing the leadership of Iran, which she says would prevent war. Yeah. That's the mindset of these people. Quick, what we need to do is we need to decimate this entire country and we need to bomb its leadership and destroy its infrastructure. And then in doing so, that will most certainly not make the people of this country hate us and create further war down the line. They are fucking morons. Let's throw it into this clip of Nikki Haley. Just kidding. They're not morons. They're literally evil.
The problem that we've had is that everybody waits for it to get bad before they do something about it. Where did this all start? None of this would have started had Biden not lifted the sanctions on Iran. You allowed billions of dollars to go in from China importing their oil. And what did that do? That gave money to the proxies to get these missiles, to do these things, to do the training, to invade Israel. All of that happened because they got money. And Biden still to this second hasn't increased sanctions on Iran. That's lunacy, because you're just continuing to pay them for trying to now kill our soldiers. There are things we can do that are not war. But not having common sense, there's no excuse for that. And this is something where we've seen him do it with Iran. We saw him do it with Afghanistan. We're seeing him do it with Russia and Ukraine. You have to be tough. That doesn't mean starting a war. That actually means preventing war. But when countries see that you're tough and you're serious, they back off. By nature, they back off. Iran knows they can't beat America. They've always known that. But as long as they smell blood in the water, they're going to keep doing this.
Governor Haley, I want to thank you for coming by today.
Let's jump into this response from Joe Biden and his administration that the White House released in response to the death of these American citizens. But something you need to focus on with what Nikki Haley said there is, and this is a very sly move that she did. She's like, and this is what happens when you open up sanctions on Iran. That way they can start interacting with Russia and with China. Tying this in, creating the axis of evil that Benjamin Netanyahu so dutifully was trying to do during that of the war between Israel and Hamas. And what happened there? We saw that he was tying in Russia with Iran, with China, saying this is the new axis of evil. Nikki Haley slyly and subversively using that exact kind of rhetoric. Well, let's jump into it. Today, America's heart is heavy. Last night, 3 U.S. service members were killed and many wounded during an unmanned aerial drone attack on our forces stationed in northeast Jordan near the Syrian border. While we are still gathering the facts of this attack, we know it was carried out by radical Iranian-backed militant groups operating in Syria and Iraq. Jill and I join the families and friends of our fallen and Americans across the country in grieving the loss of these warriors in the despicable and wholly unjust attack. These service members embodied the very best of our nation. unwavering in their bravery, unflinching in their duty, unbending in their commitment to our country, risking their own safety for the safety of their own fellow Americans and our allies and partners with whom we stand in the fight against terrorism. It is a fight we will not cease. The 3 American service members we lost were patriots in the highest sense, and their ultimate sacrifice will never be forgotten by our nation. Together we will keep the sacred obligation we bear to these families. We will strive to be worthy of their honor and valor. We will carry on their commitment to fight terrorism, and we have no doubt we will hold all of these responsible to account at a time and in a manner of our choosing. Every single talking head that supports endless war is doing what right now? Fomenting conflict with Iran, because as we can see Joe Biden here saying, while we are still gathering the facts of this attack, we know it was carried out by radical Iranian-backed militant groups operating in Syria and Iraq. Well, here's what's so interesting about that. He says, while we are still gathering the facts of this attack, and then we go on here to see from Dave DeCamp, if you are unfamiliar with who Dave is, he is someone from antiwar.com. He's one of their writers and one of the best voices in the liberty space, and truly one of the most knowledgeable people you could go to if you wanted information on why it's so important that we stand for the principles of being anti-war. Here's the Pentagon admitting it has no evidence Iran was behind the attack that killed 3 U.S. troops, but is blaming them anyways. Remember this if Biden bombs Iran tonight. If the standard is that Iran is a legitimate target because it supports the Shia militias, by that logic, the U.S. is a legitimate target of Russia, Hamas, etc., etc. And that's most certainly true, but they would never apply that standard because these people only operate on double standards, and if they didn't have a double standard, then they most certainly wouldn't have any.
Idris.
Just to follow up, you said Iran was behind the attack. So what does that mean? Have you seen evidence of financing or directing anything specific to this attack? Not just generally, but specifically.
So maybe I need to clarify further from what Lita had mentioned. We know that Iran funds these groups, like Kataib Hezbollah. We know that these IRGC-backed militias are the ones responsible for attacks on our troops in Iraq and Syria. Beyond that, we're doing an intelligence assessment. We don't have, I can't give you today that.
This attack, linking it to Iran.
We just know that Iran funds these groups like Kataib Hezbollah and other groups that have attacked our forces, but I don't have more to share on that.
You're saying, right?
As a general matter, yes.
I know many people aren't caught up to date on the timeline of what's going on with Iran's current interactions with the involvement of the Israel-Hamas conflict and how this correlates with the United States and then leading to the death of these soldiers, so we'll run through that just real quick. So basically, the Biden administration gave Iran $6 billion. Iran then, what people are speculating on, is funded Hamas in their attack on Israel, so technically that would make the Biden administration and the United States government responsible for the death of all those Israelis. Nonetheless, that's a conversation in itself that many people within the political class don't want to have. And then because of this, then we see people like Lindsey Graham fomenting dissent against Iran, calling for bombing Iranian oil refineries. And then what happens is Iran ends up seizing this oil tanker with links to the U.S. in the Gulf of Oman in response to tensions that have been going on for over a year. And here we see the Iranian Navy has seized a U.S.-linked oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman as part of a long-running dispute with the U.S. over an American court order a year ago that seized Iranian oil on the tanker and unloaded that cargo in Texas. Official Iranian news agencies said on Wednesday that the tanker had been taken on authority of an Iranian court order, but the news will add to the growing tensions about freedom of navigation in the region as a result of the repeated Houthi rebel attacks on ships in the Red Sea. And if you're unfamiliar about this, Iran is also backing the Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels are those in Yemen who have been consistently getting bombed endlessly by the Saudi Arabians, and with it, every single time that the Houthi rebels would be attacked by the Yemeni government, they would come back stronger, and with it, they're now the dominant faction in the region. Okay, so because of all this, Iran is now linked inextricably to so many of the different factors that correlate within this conflict. And then we run over here to see the 3 deaths of these soldiers. And well, it's quite sad. This is just what happens. And you know why I say it's just what happens? Because it's what happens when we have innocent people in the United States that are sitting there abroad, 7,000 miles away, sitting in a bunker in Jordan on the border of Syria, a country that we are occupying 1/3 of, and of course it's the 1/3 with all of the oil, but nonetheless, again, a conversation for a different day. We don't see anyone in the political class addressing this. Why is it that we have troops in Syria? Why is it that we have troops on the Jordanian border? No one will address it. All they say is, well, what we have to focus on now is striking Iran, completely avoiding all of the nuance. And here we go on to Bloomberg to see Biden faces pressure to confront Iran after U.S. troops killed. Person familiar says death will force a stronger U.S. response. More aggressive stances risk direct confrontation with Iran, and that's exactly what we're risking currently. And as you've already seen, they don't even have all of the information backing their assertion that this is fully backed by Iran, but they're going to run with it anyways because it gives them an excuse to run with what Wesley Clark talked about so long ago, overtaking 7 countries and with that finishing off with Iran. Now we jump over here, and this is something that I thought was genuinely amazing, was an article from antiwar.com that we will be throwing this into, and we'll be reading this, something that Scott Horton made that was just genuinely phenomenal. U.S. troops in Iraq are a tripwire for war with Iran. Scott's absolutely right about everything he says in this article, but the one thing that he got wrong was that it wasn't U.S. troops in Iraq. It was U.S. troops stationed along the Jordanian and Syrian border. U.S. troops in Iraq are a tripwire for war with Iran. The New York Times Monday noted the increasing likelihood that U.S. troops will be killed by mortars or rocket fire from Shiite militias in Iraq or Syria as they have been attacked and wounded repeatedly in the past 3 months as locals take revenge for Israel's violence in Gaza. ISIS also having motive to attack and frame the Shiites as well. As General Mattis said years ago, I paid a military security price every day as the commander of CENTCOM because the Americans were seen as biased in support of Israel, and that all the moderate Arabs who want to be with us, they can't come out publicly in support of a people who don't show respect for the Arab Palestinians. The point is that as Israel escalates against Hezbollah in Syria and the US escalates in Syria and Iraq, they assassinated a Shiite militia leader with a drone strike in Baghdad 2 weeks ago, leading to the government to demand U.S. withdrawal, and against the Houthis in Yemen, the danger of a real regional war against the Shiite countries and substrate militias and terrorist groups is quite high. The Times says the Biden regime says that if Americans are killed in Iraq, they will feel the political necessity to expand to war with Iran with at least what they consider limited strikes. At that point, it seems very likely it would be all bets off and the Ayatollah would go to war and urge the rest of the so-called Axis of Resistance or Shiite Crescent to join them. Even if Russia and China do nothing but watch, the cost to the United States would be enormous. U.S. troops, airmen, sailors, etc. would be at risk in Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, and Saudi, along with an empire worth of equipment based in Qatar and Bahrain, home of CENTCOM and the center of American air power there, as well as the home of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. Iran has thousands of missiles that can reach these targets, as well as air defenses which would be capable of destroying many Air Force and Navy planes before air dominance over Iran could be achieved if it ever could at all, which may be a big assumption. The Iraqi government and army would also virtually certainly take Iran's side and join up with the militias to march on Iraqi Kurdistan and force U.S. troops out. Same for Syria. Never mind the danger of Hezbollah-type groups wreaking havoc across the EU and hopefully not the US too, nor the threat that US Sunni client monarchies and dictatorships in the region could fall and be replaced by who knows what. So then what is Biden supposed to do? Unleash our entire Navy and Air Force, possibly even Army, Marines, and SOCOM against Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran at the same time, and all to continue to abet Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza? In 2007, the chiefs told W. Bush, no way. They don't want to fight unless they know we will have escalation dominance over every stage of the conflict, and here they know they would not have it. I move for a vote of no confidence in President Biden's leadership. Once again, another informative article from antiwar.com. Please go give them a follow on Twitter. Go ahead, read antiwar.com, throw it on your browser, favorite it, even if you're just skimming through so you can understand the nature of what's going on in the world. The topics themselves are incredibly informative, and they're written by some wonderfully well-spoken people, as well as people who are incredibly knowledgeable on so many of these different topics. Far more than I am, and with it, I would gladly point you to these people who are nothing more than experts in analyzing the nature of geopolitics. Well, I was reading that article, and something that struck me was a tweet from Joe Biden, because I remembered something. I remember the time when everyone in the political class that was against Donald Trump was talking about how he was going to bring on World War III. Donald Trump was going to end the world. He was going to defy the Constitution, put us in unconstitutional wars, even though he was a president that hadn't put us in any new wars. Don't get me wrong, he didn't end them like he should have. But at the same time, you have to look at the fact that even when Donald Trump did try to pull troops out of Syria, they lied to him, and in doing so actually led to the deaths of U.S. troops, which ended up being people like that of Joe Kent's wife, Joe Kent being someone from Washington State who is now running for Congress, I believe, or Senate. I think it's Congress. Anyways, the fact is that people were consistently saying that Donald Trump was going to be the one that brings us to the brink of World War III. He's going to be inciting unconstitutional edicts so we can go ahead and fight war with Iran. And well, we have this tweet from Joe Biden. Let's be clear. Donald Trump does not have the authority to take us into war with Iran without congressional approval. A president should never take this nation to war without the informed consent of the American people. January 6th, 2020. Isn't that just something? Isn't that amazing? Well, it turns out that Joe Biden, much like every single other person in the political class, is just using talking points and hollow platitudes because they don't actually care about the standards established by democracy. All it means to them is a word that applies their metrics of control over you. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. You can never trust any of these goons. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, tell someone you love them. Peace out.